right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, a bill protecting gender-affirming treatments such as hormone therapy and reassignment surgery has been introduced. The New York Civil Liberties Union tells us more. Next up, the Elijah Alavi Foundation is here to talk to us about the Elijah Law, which ensures the safety of children with food allergies in child care center and daycare facilities. Finally, a group of women in New York are fighting to get a bill through the New York State Legislature that would allow women who suffer a stillbirth to receive paid family leave. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. Hello, welcome to Today's Verdict, the interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. Well, Today's Verdict is always encouraging you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet me at David Lesh and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. And check us out at bronxnet.tv. Mayor Eric Adams signed an executive order that will protect gender-affirming care. This is a response to dozens of recent laws outside of New York State that restrict the ability of minors to receive such care. Well, Policy Counsel Ali Bohm from NYCLU is here to tell us more. How are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
Well, thanks for making it here. This is such an important topic, and I'm really glad you're here to discuss it. Tell us how you got involved in the issue. What made you decide to advocate for this?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I think as a member of the LGBTQ community, I've been lucky to advocate on behalf of my community for the last, for a lifetime, but professionally for the last number of years. And I think if you really want to make change, you got to start with who are hurting the most. And right now it's trans folk, and it's trans folk of color in particular, and trans young people. And so this was an obvious issue for me to work on, and I think an obvious issue for the New York trans health community to work on.
At what age does a child start to think, well, maybe I don't want to be what I was necessarily thought of as or I was supposed to be? When does that start to happen to a child? 10, 11, 12? When does a child start to think, I identify as something else?
So it can depend on the individual. We are all individuals, and just as we come to know our sexuality at different ages of our lives, we come to know our gender at different ages. I know young children who can tell you as young as 3 or 4, Mommy, I'm a girl, or Mommy, I'm a boy. That can come very soon, and for some people their discovery is later in life. I think a lot of the generation before me, you saw people coming out later because perhaps they always felt uncomfortable in their skin and didn't know why and didn't have language for it. They didn't know there was a world out there.
So if it could really happen at any age, really any age from when you were very young to once you're in your teens, let's say, when do you make the issue, in other words, as a child, that you want to tell either the school or your parents? When does that usually end up happening? Does it usually happen within a year from thinking about that, or a little bit later? When do you usually find that it's time to have this conversation and start really seriously thinking about it? Immediately? When do you think?
Again, it's really individual. And it's going to depend a lot on, is this young person in a supportive family? Are they in a supportive school? Do they have access to gender-affirming care? And I should say here, for young people, gender-affirming care is let them wear dresses, call them by a name, therapy. We're not.
Do schools have people who can help lend a sympathetic ear to students who feel that they want to change their gender?
Some do, and actually, this is a good segue. Just last week, the New York State Department of Education put out a new legal update and best practices on supporting transgender and gender-expansive youth in schools. So that's a really fabulous tool for schools. It really goes soup to nuts. What do you do about names and pronouns? What do you do about student records? What do you do about bathrooms and locker rooms? What do you do about athletics? And it provides, single-sex classes, and it provides, very concrete examples, which is a great tool both for schools that want to be advocates for their students and for parents and students who want to advocate for themselves.
So once we're taking medicines now, or we're actually having surgical procedures, when do we bring the parents into this? How does that work from a legal standpoint?
Well, so legally, and I'll talk about New York State.
If you could.
But this for your audience, this may be different depending on what state you're in.
Sure.
But legally, young people in New York are generally not able to consent to their own health care. The assumption is that a parent or guardian will consent. There are a few exceptions to that. There are categorical exceptions. Any young person who is married, who's in the armed services, who's a parent, who is homeless or runaway and affiliated with a certain program, right? Can consent to all health care. Then there are also types of care that young people can consent to, any young person, as long as they're decisionally capable. And that's really important. Decisionally capable means they understand the risks and benefits of a proposed treatment and alternatives to that treatment and can make an informed decision. And those are things like reproductive health care, some substance abuse treatment, mental health counseling in certain settings. Realistically, for most young people who are exploring their gender, they might be able to get some therapy in some settings without involving a parent because of the ways in which our consent laws work. But for something like a puberty blocker or hormones, they're going to, in most cases, need to involve a parent.
What tips would you give to somebody who may be watching today and is having an issue with their gender and wondering what they should do? Who do they reach out to think about it? Who do they talk to?
It's a great question. I think start by talking to a trusted adult, and that's how most LGBTQ folks end up starting, right? You find, hopefully it's your parent. Some people are not in safe family relationships, and it's a trusted teacher, or it's the local LGBT community center.
Right.
One thing that didn't exist for the generation above me and is just starting to exist for my generation, or started to exist for my generation when we were coming up, is the internet. Obviously, there's two sides of that coin, but folks can look at sites like the Transgender Legal Defense and Education Fund, the Trevor Project if they're considering suicide, the National Transgender Center for Equality, oh my gosh, NCTE. There are any number of reputable organizations out there that folks can get connected into.
Let's talk a little about your organization, because we don't have too much time left. If somebody wanted to reach you or reach your organization, how do they do that?
So you can reach us at nyclu.org, and this is actually a really great moment for me to say that we have a Know Your Rights on our website on LGBTQ youth in schools. We have a Know Your Rights around changing gender markers on identity documents. We have a number of resources there, and also links out to some of the other community organizations.
It's been great information that you've been providing. Hopefully you'll come back and let us know how things are going.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks very
Thank you.
much. All right. Well, we have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back right after this.
Did you know dragging chains can spark a wildfire?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
All right. Welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host, David Lesh. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet me at David Lesh. In 2017, Elijah Silvera, a 3-year-old boy, died of an allergic reaction to a dairy product at a pre-K. Elijah's lawyer is a legislative effort to ensure the safety of children with food allergies in child care center and daycare facilities. We're here to tell us more via Skype is co-founder and president Thomas Silvera from the Elijah Alavi Foundation. Thomas, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about what you intend to do or what you're trying to accomplish, if you could.
Well, in my intention, well, our intention, my family's intentions in terms of our accomplishment is making sure that we can provide a safe space for children in childcare centers. When we had advocated and worked diligently with legislators in New York on Elijah's Law, we wanted to make sure we put everything that was known that would keep children safe from making sure that there were developing emergency protocols, strategies, discussing food allergies with children, educators, and plan for preventing any exposure to food allergies in terms of mitigating risk. So implementing a law such as that in New York State was one of the very first to be mandated to protect all licensed and registered childcare centers throughout New York State to the tragedy of what happened to my son. So our goal is to get it state by state.
Tell me exactly what happened, the tragedy. If you could explain it to us a little bit. I know it's difficult. I'm sure it's very, very difficult. But maybe you can tell the viewers a little bit about the impetus behind the law, if you could.
Yeah, so with my son, he was only 3 years old at the time.
Yeah.
His first week of childcare. And, one of the things is you have to do your due diligence as a parent and making sure you cross your T's and you dot your I's before you send a child with any illness to a childcare center. Us doing our homework and our research, we found a childcare center that provided all the necessary care for our son who has multiple food allergies and asthma. And when an educator or a facility can give you their stamp of approval and say, hey, we do take children such as your son, and we do provide the emergency services in the event of emergency. But when the facility like that fails you, and you're a parent who had entrusted in them, it just changes everything. It changes the dynamic, of course, of how you will look at other facilities going forward. So when you're putting your trust, we look to these childcare facilities to provide the necessary care as we would as parents when we're not around. So they're considered the caregivers for our children. So we want them to give them the same line of protection as anyone. But the system had failed us. The facility had failed us in stating that they had trained people who understand the signs and symptoms of food allergies and allergic reactions. It's one of those things. It's like, how were they able to fail us even by providing us with this thorough information? There's so many things that can go into that.
What type of procedures now, the new procedures, are we talking about?
So with the policies and new procedures, it's just making sure that the state requires an up-to-date health records that includes their allergies. It requires a food allergy action plan. It also provides prevention, recognition, and treatment in the event of emergency. It also requires new policies and guidance for their childcare centers. I know New York now requires that the childcare centers have to call 911 before they call a parent in the event of emergency. And it's so many components that goes into it in terms of also administering epinephrine in the event of emergency and calling 911. Most people don't understand that if a child is suffering an allergic reaction, to give them Benadryl. Benadryl is not the first line of defense. Epinephrine is the only life-saving medication that can actually prevent allergic reaction from getting worse. It doesn't stop it immediately. It buys it time to get them to emergency services in the event of a second reaction. So epinephrine is always the first line of defense. So having these states require the childcare facilities to have food services policies to address food allergies, to also have posted proponents in the childcare facilities in terms of information and so forth. So with these policies in place, it just gives a better, safer guidance for the parent and peace of mind.
Getting back to the training of the staff, how is that going to be done? Who is supposed to do that? Because it can be a little bit complicated to make sure the staff understands what to do in an emergency.
No, absolutely. So, my organization, the Elijah Alabi Foundation, we have our own personal training with a company called Belay. We also go into these childcare facilities and provide the training necessary for them. But also the Office of Children and Family Services, which kind of governs the licensed and registered child care centers, us working with them had provided them with the information about our son. They created a training and also video, an online virtual session where every educator goes online, takes the training, and it's mandated. So every educator in the registered and licensed facility must be trained and understand how to recognize the signs and symptoms, to mitigate risk, and to inject an auto-injector in the event of emergency. So the Office of Children and Family Services have literally taken care of all of that. So it's one of those things. Every licensed and registered child care centers have received the information. They understand what's going on. They understand Elijah's Law. So if they're in the event of an incident, there are protocols that go into place where the child care center is evaluated if the incident is not taken seriously in a sense.
Are there actual doctors who will tell the parents, what the parents should be telling the facilities? Are doctors involved, or are the parents directly giving the facilities the information?
So when a parent brings their child to a child care facility, there is a food allergy action plan they need to fill out. There are steps that they need to fill out, especially if you are letting your child care facility know that your child has food allergies. So one, there's a 504 plan. There's also an independent IEP that these children can have in order for these child care facilities to recognize their food allergies. The doctors fill out their whole entire medical form, their food allergies, or whatever it is that they're affected by, and provide that to these child care centers. These child care centers have to have these listed, even with their medications, with their auto-injectors, with any medications that they need in the event of emergency. So doctors are involved when they're providing. They have to give the medical information to the facilities. But in terms of having a doctor to be the facilitator, to be the one who is the mediator in a sense for the conversation, it's mostly the parents that are advocating for their children and making sure that the child care centers are keeping their child safe.
All right, well, Thomas, I want to thank you very much. It's a tough subject to discuss, and we really appreciate you being here. It's really, really important, and you're doing a very good service for everyone who's watching right now. Thank you. All right, we have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back right after this. Stay with us.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. Can you see anything different as a pill?
No.
You don't know?
Fentanyl is being mixed into everything now. There's only one thing that will save somebody's life. That is naloxone nasal spray.
Fentanyl, it's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable.
Why would drug dealers put a lethal dose of fentanyl in drugs if they know it's so harmful?
Really just all about the money.
I just didn't realize that one pill could change your whole life.
More kids should know.
All right, the Push for Empowered Pregnancy, one of the groups spearheading the bill that will close the gap to protect New York's stillbirth parents in terms of receiving paid family leave, is here. Executive Director Samantha Banerjee. How are you, Samantha?
Good. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's our place. It's a very interesting issue, and I think it's an important issue because there are many stillbirth pregnancies. And just for the viewers, how many a year?
Yeah, so it's actually pretty shocking. We lose almost 23,000 babies every single year in the United States to stillbirth.
That is a ridiculous amount.
That is, yeah, to put that in context, that's 3 kindergarten classes a day, about 65 children a day. And it's claiming more lives than prematurity, SIDS, car accidents, drowning, guns, fire, poison, flu, and listeria combined.
Now, it's okay to say you've had a personal experience with respect to stillbirths?
Yeah, sadly, I learned all of this the hard way. In 2013, I had a totally normal, healthy, perfect pregnancy with my first child, my daughter Alana. And 2 days before her due date, I showed up at the hospital in labor, thinking we were finally bringing home our baby girl, only to be told she no longer had a heartbeat.
So, what happens when you are discharged from the hospital? before any type of legislation now, what would normally happen if you were discharged with a stillbirth?
Yeah, so one thing a lot of people don't realize is that stillbirth is still a birth. So, my daughter I was 9 months pregnant. She was 6.5 pounds, and I still had to go through labor and delivery just like any other child.
And the recovery and everything that goes with
exactly
giving
the
birth.
same, if not worse. In fact, stillbirth mothers have been shown to be almost 5 times more likely to experience severe maternal complications. So yeah, it's the same postpartum effects. You're bleeding, your milk comes in because your body doesn't know that there's no baby to feed, and you are going through the same hormonal changes, just like anybody else.
So you'd be discharged from the hospital, you go home, and then work would just expect you to come back to work because you didn't have a child, correct?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case right now for far too many families in New York State, and that's exactly where this bill came from.
All right. What stage are we in with respect to the bill?
Unfortunately, we are...
Because I understand they're rewriting it and changing it in different ways. Tell us where we are.
Yeah, so this bill was introduced back in January. Actually, it was introduced the year before, passed unanimously in the Senate, but there wasn't enough time in the Assembly. So when it was introduced back again in January, our team of all volunteers, bereaved moms who have personally been affected by stillbirth, if not by the gap in the law themselves, started going around to all the legislators we could get a hold of to get buy-in on this bill. And we ended up at the end of the session here with, it had passed unanimously in the Senate again, and with 98 Assembly members, that's 2/3 of the New York Assembly, co-sponsoring the bill.
Tell me what you're looking for. What does the bill really spell out?
So what the bill does, it's not an expansion, it's not expensive. All it does is close a dangerous and cruel loophole in New York's paid family leave program. So what's happening today, my friend Cassidy, who's the mom behind this bill, is a perfect example. So after her daughter Olivia was born still at 36 weeks, she came home from the hospital after delivering her. About a week later, they had Olivia's funeral. She got home the next day and got a call from New York State saying, I know that you have been paying into the paid family leave program for years, and that during your pregnancy you applied and were approved, but since you no longer have a baby to bond with because your baby is not alive, New York State, you're not eligible. So New York State is revoking your previously approved paid family leave that you were relying on to get through your postpartum period.
So what happens next?
So Cassidy, Cassidy is the primary breadwinner in her family. They were relying on her salary and on the $1,100 a week that she had been promised to pay their mortgages and pay their bills. And so, after a week, Cassidy realized, I don't know how we're going to keep putting food on the table. She went to her doctor, asked to be cleared 2 weeks after giving birth to go back to work because she needed to earn a paycheck. And her doctor said, Cassidy, even if your birth had been totally normal and uncomplicated, and if Olivia had lived, I would never approve you. Like, nobody can go back to work within 6 weeks, really more like 12 after what you've been through. So no, I'd lose my medical license if I tried to clear you to go back to work. So Cassidy drained her savings, ran up all her credit cards, because they were basically making a choice between her health, potentially her life, and their financial stability.
What about disability insurance? Does it pay for this type of?
So disability does cover stillbirth, thankfully. However, as New York State said to Cassidy when they called her, don't worry, you won't get the $1,100 a week you're promised, but disability will give you $170 a week.
Which doesn't cut it.
Yeah, what family's going to pay $170 going to cover anything in New York?
I wonder why this hasn't been dealt with before. There's been so many stillbirths every year.
So many stillbirths.
For decades and decades and decades in this country. Why have we not thought about the fact that now that women are back, have to work, are now the breadwinners, and can't work because they're in physical and emotional pain, where do they expect the money to go to?
Exactly. No, and the thing that's most absurd about this is that these are women who have paid into the system and, again, already been approved. This is not any money that New York State hadn't already budgeted for and been planning to pay out anyway. It's these women were given the money and then it was ripped out of their hands. And this is happening to, there's up to 4 stillbirths every single day just in New York State. There's 900 stillbirths every year just in New York City. And the thing that's most outrageous about it is that Cassidy's husband, or the non-birthing partner, is still eligible for paid family leave because
that's crazy.
Because the non-birthing partner is eligible in order to pay for the serious medical condition of the birthing person, which is the postpartum period, because it's well recognized that this is one of the most dangerous times.
So they're recognizing that there's postpartum, but they're not recognizing that, but they're thinking you don't have to take care of a child, so therefore you have to get right back to work.
Exactly.
What would you recommend to somebody who maybe is watching today and they've just had a stillbirth and you've gone through it yourself? What kind of maybe guidance or tips could you give them?
Well, I mean, the number one thing is to know that you're not alone. I think stillbirth has really flown under the radar in this country. Again, one of the reasons why the gap in this law exists, because it's not an intentional gap, it's just that no one even thinks about us unless you or someone you know has been through it. It's just not something that most people even consider. And so that results in so many of us leaving the hospital empty-handed and just feeling absolutely alone. So I want people to know that they're not alone.
Right.
There's lots of us out there, and we will help you guide you through situations like this, and help you fight for your rights.
What politicians are getting behind this? Who's helping you on this?
So the lead sponsors on the bill were Senator Tim Kennedy and Assemblywoman Jennifer Rajkumar. And again, this was a very, very popular and bipartisan bill. I mean, we again met with dozens of legislators. We didn't hear one word against this bill. The unanimous sentiment was, this is a common sense, common decency bill.
So then why is it being rewritten?
That is a very good question, David. Honestly, so we are a team of volunteer advocates. We're not professionals. We're not lobbyists. We don't have money behind us. We have no experience in politics. Again, we're just a bunch of moms who will not be personally affected by this issue going forward. God willing, no one has a stillbirth again. But we're just trying to make sure that other parents don't suffer the same injustice that so many of us have. And so we went in this with blind faith and trust in our legal process and in our elected officials, and followed all the rules. You know, they said get co-sponsors, we got co-sponsors. They said make it bipartisan. We didn't hear one word from anybody, and we were told the entire time that this was, you know, a slam dunk and we're going to go through. And then at the 11th hour, it got pulled.
Welcome to politics.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
But we'd love you to come back and tell us how you're doing. It's a very important issue, and we really appreciate you coming here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And people can learn more at pushpregnancy.org or follow us on social media at pushpregnancy.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at bronxnet.tv. Also remember, if there is a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesh@bronxnet.org or tweet me at davidlesh, and make sure to hashtag #AskToday'sVerdict. From myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. I'm David Lesh, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks with an all-new episode of Today's Verdict right here on BronxNet. Take care.